Aloha, inspired moneymakers. Welcome to the Timeless Investment Exploring the World of Luxury Watches. I'm your host, Andy Wong, and we're going to dive deep into the world of horology, where craftsmanship meets innovation and time itself becomes a canvas for human creativity. I'm not wearing a watch, so this is going to be a lot of learning for me. Welcome to Inspired Money, the live stream where we really try to learn how to give more, make more, and live more. With watches, it's about learning how to live more, how to enjoy life, and we're going to learn many different things. But before we get to that, I just want to thank all of you who have donated to our Maui fundraiser. I hosted a concert here in my hometown 3 weeks ago, had hula dancers, musicians. I was on stage playing music, singing songs about Lahaina. And so far, we've raised $7,000. So if you're so inclined, would love your support. You can make donations, which are tax deductible, at inspiredmoney.fm/Maui. You can see that running along the bottom. That's MAUI. And I hope that we can make an impact. That 7,000 plus will be going to directly to Maui relief organizations that are on the ground. So welcome. Today we're going to kick things off by exploring the art of watchmaking, a marvel of human ingenuity that has evolved from ancient sundials to today's fusion of tradition and technology. We're going to delve into the heart and soul of a watch, from the escapement to the tourbillon, and even the revolutionary quartz movement. But we're not stopping at mechanics. We're celebrating the art form that is luxury watchmaking. We're going to unveil the stories behind iconic timepieces that have graced the wrists of explorers, astronauts, and royalty. From the Rolex Submariner to the Omega Speedmaster, these are not just watches, they're legends in their own right. And we're also going to talk about an entire world of independent watchmakers, and we have one as a panelist tonight. What's a legend without a legacy? We're going to guide you through the art of building a luxury watch collection, touching on strategies, ethical choices, and the challenges you might face. We'll also navigate the treasure trove that's the luxury watch secondary market, offering tips for both buyers and sellers. And because a treasure is best when it lasts, we're going to wrap up with steps to take on how to care for your luxury watches so that they can be passed down to future generations. So sit back, let the hands of time guide you through an episode that promises to be as timeless as the watches we're discussing. Stay tuned, inspired moneymakers, because time is of the essence. And in this episode, we're making every second count. Mahalo for joining us. Let's make this an episode to remember. Let's bring in our panelists. We've got a stellar group here tonight. Let me start with Dan Spitz, a multi-talented individual who transitioned from being the lead guitarist of the award-winning metal band Anthrax to a world-renowned luxury watchmaker. His music literally is out of this world, playing on NASA's Curiosity rover on Mars. With Swiss and American degrees in watchmaking and micromechanical engineering, Dan is also an advocate for autism awareness. His life is truly a testament to transformation and endless possibilities. Welcome, Dan. Excited to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I greatly appreciate it. And glad to be here and help spread the disease.
Yeah, we're going to inspire people to really get into watches, I think. Ariel Adams is the founder and editor-in-chief of aBlogtoWatch, one of the largest horology websites. With over a decade in the industry, Ariel is also a podcaster and author known for his honest approach to watch journalism. His influence extends far beyond mere timekeeping, making him a significant player in the American watch market. Welcome, Ariel. I'm glad that you could make it today.
Thank you, Andy. I'm always happy to be an advocate for the hobby.
How many podcasts do you host? Because when I looked in my podcast player, I saw many podcasts coming up.
Currently, we have 2 regular podcasts we do, which is Superlative and the weekly show, which just goes over the news. But you're right. I've been podcasting in the watch space since 2010. I was the first one to do it. So I guess I innovated the modern internet conversation around timepieces.
Love it. Happy to have you here.
Thank you.
And then to round out our panel today, with some technical difficulties because his camera is not working, so you only see a still image of him, we have Carl Kim. He's a data scientist for the Department of Homeland Security. He's the creator of the YouTube channel My Watch Journey. As the son of a watchmaker, Carl has built a community of like-minded enthusiasts where he shares insights, reviews, and industry secrets. His channel serves as a haven for those passionate about timepieces, offering a blend of expertise and community spirit. And Carl is also an economist, so he brings a unique economist view to watch collecting. Welcome, Carl.
Thank you, Andy. Yeah, so just briefly, yes, I have a personal connection to watchmaking because my father was a watchmaker all his life. You know, I have fond memories of working in his shop during the 1990s. He recently passed away in November of 22. And so I started this channel, part of it as a tribute to him and his memories. I started collecting watches because they're the watches that I remember when I was working in his shop. And, you know, he handled a lot of Rolexes and Amigas in his day. And also, you know, it seems like my videos have taken off lately because there's been some crazy market conditions in the luxury watch market. And I know there's a lot of frustrated, you know, collectors out there, and they needed some help in understanding exactly what's going on. So I've made some market analysis and predictions about, you know, Rolex prices and such, and they've been very well received by the community. So I'm very happy to be here with this expert panel, you know, and I'm very excited about this talk.
Well, it's really nice that you can pay tribute to your dad. Where was he making watches?
Oh, he was, so we're from South Korea, and he learned his trade there, you know, and he told me stories about how there's no formal school. When he learned, he basically had to apprentice with a master, you know, watchmaker. And he told me basically he had to beg. He had to go and beg a watchmaker to learn the trade because this isn't something you got to get hands on. This is not something that you just read a textbook. And then we immigrated to Las Vegas, you know, and where he opened a watch shop. And I can say pretty confidently that I think he really was the best watchmaker in Vegas because I know because all the other watch shops sent their jobs to him. You know, it was my job to take their orders and you know, put it in the little envelope and write their names and, you know, that they're, you know, when the order should be ready and all that. So you know, those are my memories, and yeah, so that's how I got to this watch journey.
That's really cool. Well, welcome all the panelists. Let's jump right in. We're going to go right into segment 1. In the timeless dance of human ingenuity, the art of watchmaking stands as a marvel. From ancient sundials to today's fusion of tradition and technology, this craft has evolved. Imagine the Renaissance, birthing pocket watches, leading to the Industrial Revolution's mass-produced timepieces. Today, brands like Rolex blend craftsmanship with innovation. At the heart of the watch lies the escapement, the tourbillon, and the revolutionary quartz movement. But beyond mechanics, watchmaking is an art form. The hand finishing, the assembly, the quality control, all reflect excellence. Luxury watches are status symbols, investments, and expressions of style. They transcend utility to become something profoundly human. In these brief moments, we've journeyed through watchmaking, where engineering meets beauty, tradition embraces modernity, and time is cherished. I think with watches, a newbie like me is going to look at the face and what a watch looks like. Dan, can you kick us off? Since you're the master watchmaker among us, tell us, because I'm assuming that you look at the inside of the watch. Can you give us a sense
correct.
of what you really appreciate?
So as you dive into watches, and a similar story. I grew up in my grandfather's watch and jewelry store, having Patek Philippe's, in my hands when I was 8 years old. He was had a huge vintage collection in his store, and that's what attracts you in the beginning. And you get the bug just like anything else, and you may go out and the typical Rolex. You get yourself you graduate from law school, you want to get yourself a present, and it's always the Rolex that starts the disease. It looks great, and then you realize you go to the first board meeting, and an older attorney might have something you haven't seen before, and that's a Patek Philippe, and you go, oh, what's that? And then you learn, and you start to climb that ladder, and then you start to see the inside of what makes it go. And for a watchmaker, that's everything. It's not the fashion, it's not the curves and the look. It's there, but when we get to open the back, and especially someone like me who's spent countless hours inside of vintage timepieces, when most of it was handmade back then, even the series watches, when we would take off the back, which was not see-through back then, they all looked like Rolexes back then, right, Ariel? And we got to open the back. We're the only ones that got to see inside, and we would open per se one brand's watch and go like, wow. Holy, like how is that possible to get all that in there and do what it does when we turn it over and we see the hands? And then we get the next level up. You open up a Patek Philippe and see the finishing on something like that, and you literally just throw your tweezers down and just stand back and go like, it's not even, what human made this? Like, how did they do the finishing? Like, I wish the people could see this. And that's what I would do when I had my vintage repair stores. I would call them back, come behind my bench. This is your watch. Look what's inside. And then you climb that ladder as a collector and realize there's more worth than the dial in the hands. It has to reflect your personality. That's a huge part of watchmaking. We choose things all, in our life as we walk through life in all avenues to fit our personality, our character. Our car fits our personality. And once we have the ability to buy pretty much anything within realms that we desire. So watches are very similar to that. When you climb that ladder, get all the way to the top of the brands. And then if somebody has a very large collection, they might get to the end and go, well, what's now? And then they find independent watchmaking, where each piece is unique. Mechanics can be made in independent watchmaking that aren't succumb to board meetings, monetary values, monetary outlay for the developer. It's the sky's the limit to create anything that can, that breaks rules. Like I'm always a rule breaker in my life. So my mechanics represent, breaking rules and things like that. And it's just that disease that keeps going, and it's a wonderful thing.
Ariel, where do you see the balance between traditional craftsmanship and technological innovation in watchmaking?
Andy, thank you for the question. I want to build upon what Dan was saying. Watch collecting for me has what I call multiple vectors of appreciation. And that means that there's a lot of different ways to appreciate sometimes the same watch. As Dan explained, if you come from a watchmaking background, the movement and the craftsmanship and what I'll call the inherent value in regard to that is of the utmost importance. And that solidifies sort of your foundation of appreciation. You want to see well-made things that are well-engineered watches. But there are other vectors as well. And this is where taste comes into it. And as Dan said, personality, where you have to ask yourself, what do I care about? Some people don't know or care anything about that because it's beyond them. But you know what they care about? They care about popularity. Maybe they care about artistic design or at various levels of refinement. Some people care about the jewelry element. Some simply care that there's a famous person in history who had it. These are all appropriate ways to appreciate the hobby. At the end of the day, the watch is designed to make you feel good. And I say this in sort of a tongue-in-cheek way. This is a selfish hobby. You do this to celebrate yourself. The watch is meant to not only reflect your personality, as Dan said, but it's also meant to validate who you are. And that's why we're drawn to these things, because we like validation. We like to have some positive reinforcement for the hard work that we get up and do every single day. And watches, for whatever reason, tend to be a very well-celebrated way of doing this.
Where do you guys stand on like manual wind, automatic, or quartz?
I mean, look, if you get into the hobby long enough, you tend to really care about mechanical watches. It's beauty and engineering that the human eye can see. There's just as much fascination to quartz, but of course it lacks the ability to see it, the ability to make it with your hand. It requires a lot of other machinery, and therefore we don't have as much relatability. It doesn't feel alive. The number one thing people really seem to enjoy about mechanical watches is they see an analog to a living thing. They believe it has a sort of a heart rate. They can, with their own eyes, appreciate how this gear moves this, how this hand is controlled by this, and that creates a familiarity, like a little living pet on your wrist. And a lot of people, like quartz, has a whole other level of appreciation to it. I think there's an up and coming appreciation for high end quartz, but again, it's a slightly different vector of appreciation.
So as a watchmaker, let me build on everything something that Ariel said, which is all true. But from a watchmaker standpoint, we also look for value for money. We always, what I said previously was the mechanics played a large role because it takes 90% of the funds, the time, the sweat to build a micro machine. It's like putting a car engine on your wrist and reducing all those parts. So that's why we look at it that way. As we look at a quartz watch, we open the back up and we don't fix those. We go to buy them and they cost $39, but you're getting charged $6,000 for a watch. Whereas in mechanical watches, it's the complete flip. All the money goes inside what's inside because that will last for generation, the generation. I don't need to find a broken coil in the year 3027, which doesn't exist anymore. And now your watch is trash. I can fix my watch for hundreds and hundreds, if not longer years, especially the ones that I build. So yeah, it's a personal thing, but you come to appreciate that. And that, especially now when almost all watches have see-through backs, you get to see the pain and struggle that we go through to build that crap, and somehow make it work with all those complications on top of complications. But there's something for everyone in watchmaking, exactly what Ariel said. There's a quartz watch for you. If you got $1,200 and that watch speaks to you, man, that could be your entrance way. That could be your finality. It could be your entrance way into collecting more. It could be your finality. You're happy. That's where you're at. And that's a beautiful thing. And that's what's wonderful about watchmaking. There's something along every tier for everybody.
Yeah, so I have a lot of the same feelings, especially I want to agree with what Ariel was saying, because as an economist, you have to wonder, why do people buy watches, especially mechanical watches? Because I walk around, I go to Starbucks, and nowadays hardly anyone is actually wearing a watch, whether it's quartz or mechanical, unless it's the Apple Watch. It's usually a bare wrist, right? And the fact of the matter is, as a society, we no longer depend on, mechanical time devices, to run our business. So, I really agree with what he was saying, is that you're buying a feeling. There's a personal connection that you might have, like in my case, with my personal history, my childhood, or you admire maybe a nostalgia for an older time. But basically, it's in that sense, because it's unnecessary, it's a luxury item, and you're trying to capture a feeling. I'm going to go against the grain a little bit here, because I actually do love quartz watches. And the reason I say that is because from an economics perspective, I admire quartz in terms of its accessibility. It's allowed timekeeping and very accurate timekeeping to be made available to millions, hundreds of millions of people. We know how many sales, the G-Shock has sold. I think it's over 100 million pieces over the last 10 years. So I admire it in that sense. But I do agree that how I feel about mechanical versus quartz watches is different. The way I find myself relating to those watches, that when I'm busy and I'm running around and I need to get things done, I wear my G-Shock. I wear a quartz watch because I don't have the mental energy to appreciate a mechanical piece. But when I'm, for example, sitting down, I'm into art. I like to draw. I really love to fiddle with my watch. Right now, I'm sorry you can't see this, but I'm wearing my Explorer, the 214270 reference. And I love to kind of fiddle with it. I'm taking a break from drawing, so I'll put it on the table, put it back on my wrist, take it off my wrist. And so you do have a different relationship between quartz and mechanical.
Dan, what about the tradition versus technology as a builder? Like, do you use metal components, or do you use like more modern components over time?
Well, because I see watches that come across my bench so often that have stood the test of time, and countless other hackmeisters that have been inside it and chiseling away who shouldn't have been in there. Most of us in independent watchmaking do try to stick with the traditional metallurgies, which are still very hard to find. But we do utilize other materials, trying to push forward because we have those options now. We have machines that can cut those metals. We have CNC now. We have lasers. Well, back then we couldn't. Most of the parts were stamped. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with using cutting edge materials. The problem we all had, and I keep referencing independent, just means most of my friends who are just watchmakers and building timepieces from bare raw metal. We get big stick of German silver, and out of that somehow, some way, we can build timepieces. The problem we have with futuristic metals and futuristic hairsprings, especially, and other stuff, is we usually were repair people, and we like to make sure that if you're going to spend that amount of money on a timepiece, that your son and his son and his son, who eventually get your mechanical timepiece, can actually have it, every single piece of that watch repaired. That's what we strive to do, as I strive to do as an independent. Everything that's in my timepiece can be repaired by a traditionally trained watchmaker forevermore. So your investment is solid across the board. So that's what the problems I have that I spoke about earlier about other types of timepieces, because none of us need time on our wrist anymore. Let's be honest. We don't. And that's why independent watchmaking has exploded. It's not a little guy in a little barn on top of a Swiss mountain alone anymore. It's a full-blown, massive industry with the big brands actually trying to copy all of us because we're the innovators. It's no different than when I started Anthrax and thrash metal music. When people said, you can't play that music so fast, nobody's going to buy it, we're not going to sign your band. You have to be innovative, and you have to stick with what's going to last forevermore, and be true to yourself. And I know most of my friends at this level, independent watchmaking, have the same feelings as I do. We really like to take care of the person that's investing, and it shows. Look at all the auctions at Philippe's and Sotheby's. Most of my friends' watches, maybe whatever price they sold them for, they're up in the millions now. It's incredible what's happening in watchmaking, and we don't need time on our wrist. So it's become art, mechanical art. That's what we are. That's what I call myself now. I don't even say I'm a master watchmaker. I'm a micromechanical artist. I create micromechanical art. You don't need a watch. Nobody needs a freaking watch anymore. So it is a personal thing, like you said, Andy. Very personal.
It's encouraging to hear that the artist is alive and well, that the artist can create something truly unique, and then maybe the mass market is trying to figure out how do we do that?
How is that any different than Anthrax, Metallica, Slayer, and Megadeth coming out and then everybody else following suit? We break the rules. Nobody will sign our music. Nobody will put it out. So we go out in vans and we prove on tour that look at all these hundreds of thousands and then millions of people showing up, and I'm playing to 100,000 people at a show, and Carl thinks he's nervous on here. You play with that many people, and then all of a sudden other bands go, oh, wait a minute, that's cool. Let's jump on the bandwagon, So it's got to be innovators in everything. But, watchmaking it's just an incredible, fast array of everything. There's no right, there's no wrong. It's just out there for everybody to enjoy.
Yeah, my thoughts on this is I like to segment the market. An economist would think about this in terms of mass produced versus job shop, and by job shop, I mean that in the most complimentary way, especially in terms of customization. So when we talk about, craftsmanship and innovation and which pieces are works of art and worth buying or investing in, I think, there's a clear distinction in my mind, and I think the mind of lots of watch collectors. the difference between mass-produced, machine-produced, and the kinds of pieces that Dan produces. Obviously his stuff is on another level, and I wish I could afford it, but I don't. On my civil servant salary, I think that's out of my reach.
I want to make
what people should be educated, especially if they're investing. If you're spending a lot of money, no matter if it's a Rolex, a Breitling, an Omega, or you're working your way up that tier, you should really do your research as you did in anything else you purchase, and know that most of my friends who are independents are ghost builders for most of their career before they even made their own watch for the big brands that you think you're buying and putting on your wrist. It's my friends who are making those original movements that go inside those timepieces. They're not making the case and the stylistic type things. But when big companies want a complicated timepiece, they don't usually do that within their walls. They go outside to us independents because we have the machines now. We have the same machines they have in our facilities here that I have here, and we have that time to create things that they wouldn't monetarily, want to channel their money towards. It would be a losing proposition for them at a conglomerate level.
For the context of collectors, I want to draw an analog to the automotive world because there's often a little bit more understanding. And I look at how people focus on old cars of a certain age because they can be repaired. And I know a lot of people who collect classic cars sort of stop in the 1980s because that's when a lot of electronics comes on board. And if you want to enjoy something old, because it's old, it's going to break and you need to fix it. And so there's a very practical reality that there's certain old watches that you can fix. And there are certain old watches or maybe not as old, but no longer produced watches that you cannot fix. And a lot of the old Quartz watches, for example, don't have a large amount of people that can fix them. And sometimes there's no one out there that makes the parts. Electronic parts require a lot of industrialization to produce. And once those machines and those assembly lines are gone, you're not going to be able to produce those things. One craftsman, a craftsperson cannot necessarily reproduce that. Imagine if they had to take a whole quartz oscillator and make it from scratch, grow the quartz crystal, cut the quartz crystal, wrap the coil, all this stuff. It would be insane. And you couldn't really do it. So there is a very practical reality if you're interested in older watches that there's some that you can get repaired. And today, it's a very interesting question as to what watches will have that future collectability based upon there being some individual somewhere in the world who's able to repair it. Because at the end of the day, this isn't jewelry. It's not art. It doesn't just sit there and look nice. If you enjoy it, you're often going to use it for its mechanical purposes because that's part of the enjoyment, and you're going to need to fix it.
Great point. Let's move to segment 2. In the world of horology, certain timepieces transcend mere functionality to become legends. These iconic watches tell stories of innovation, elegance, and adventure. Imagine the Rolex Submariner, a symbol of aquatic exploration, worn by James Bond himself, or the Omega Speedmaster, the Moonwatch, a testament to human achievement in space. Picture the timeless elegance of the Patek Philippe Calatrava, a beacon of luxury. The Audemars Piguet Royal Oak, a revolution in stainless steel, redefining luxury. And the Jaeger LeCoultre Reverso, an Art Deco masterpiece with a reversible case. These watches are not mere objects, they are characters in a grand narrative. They've graced the wrists of explorers, astronauts, and royalty. They've marked moments in history and continue to inspire with their blend of craftsmanship and innovation. In 60 seconds, we've journeyed through a showcase of legendary watches, each with its own unique story. They are the beating heart of an industry where art meets science, tradition meets modernity, and time itself becomes a canvas for human creativity. Ariel, you made reference to certain watches becoming popular. What makes a watch a legend in your eyes?
Well, this is, of course, the question that no one can predict. Why does something become popular? If it's a movie, if it's a song, people have investigated this, and really there's a sort of randomness. A series of things have to happen at the same time. But what I will say is there's a couple of things that every popular watch has in common. The first thing is legibility. It's something that is just easy to use and easy to read. You won't find mega popular watches that people don't like to wear on a regular basis. So it being legible and comfortable is a big part of it. Oftentimes, something being in the market for a long time, meaning generation after generation, is familiar with it. Somebody grew up with it. Somebody remembers one from their childhood and can still buy it today. And that is also something which is important, is a product existing throughout someone's lifetime and maybe even in their family's lifetime, right? So the time that something has been in the market obviously has a big part to do with it. And then again, oftentimes things which are conservative, and what I mean by that, not too wild, not too flamboyant, tend to last a long time, tend to become timeless. If you look at a lot of today's popular watches, they really began as sport watches or even military watches. You look at the Submariner, which was never really designed to be a luxury timepiece. It was designed to be a pretty darn good diving watch that you could wear at other times. And the practicality and the personality that came with that is what landed it to be so popular. It wasn't that it was luxurious by nature. And so I think that there's, over time, something beyond the mere showing off nature of the product, which has to connect with people. I'd love to hear what the others on the panel think about it.
Yeah, I'm curious, like how much is just really good marketing? Or maybe it's like music. I feel like there's a uniqueness. Sometimes a certain watch is just very recognizable. It's almost like a band. You hear a song and you're like, that's definitely Anthrax. That's
But
Metallica.
think of who legitimizes it, right? If something is a high-end watch, there's a relatively small number of people around the world who can truly appreciate it for what it is, that knows what they're seeing. The rest of society needs to look at markers from thought leaders, and oftentimes celebrities or other famous people have more sway because they legitimize a lot of behavior, purchase options, and things like that. So it begins with nerds like us saying this is good, and then later on, eventually enough other people realize it before that information permeates to the mainstream.
Well, I think I agree first totally across the board, but I also used to sit at my bench, seeing every kind of timepiece, a lot of timepieces, and I think from our parents and grandparents' generation, the watchmakers like me who called people back at the bench and said, "Look, man, you're wearing brand A, right?" And the gentleman, let's say he just bought himself a Jaeger LeCoultre and a Reverso or whatever it is, and he wants it checked out back then. The watchmaker opens up, calls back and says, "You see this? This is a watch. That's not a watch. That's not going to last. That's going to keep coming back in my shop. This will last you. You can beat the crap out of this thing. Go play polo all you want, bro, because it's kick-ass inside. As long as you like the outside, that's wonderful." And that has transcended into that generational thing where my grandfather had this, and it has that feeling, like I do for the Calatrava, which is what my father wore a Rolex and he wore a Calatrava. So Calatrava for me, and gave me a Calatrava for my bar mitzvah. So for me, that's a seriously personal thing. I mean, my timepiece coming out now, the case is basically Calatrava. I can't not make that shape. That hourglass shape is forevermore. It's going to be embedded in everybody's soul, never go out of style, forevermore. So there's things that have just stood the test of time, but they're inherent, as Ariel said, they're inherently in all of us, predisposition from our parents and grandparents and whatnot.
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this too, because this is so important to collectors. What are we exactly buying? It's a luxury piece, and absolutely we are looking for a feeling. But I think we can deconstruct a particular watch, and I wore the Explorer for that reason, because it's always been associated with Sir Edmund Hillary and the summit to Mount Everest. So I read a comment that I think really expresses what makes things iconic, and it's a little cynical, I will admit that, but basically what it said was it's marketing that has been mythologized. And for example, the Rolex Explorer will have a situation where Rolex heavily implies in their marketing, they don't say it outright because they can't, but they heavily imply that it was carried by Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay, when they summited, but the truth is they didn't. There's a legend and impression out there in the public about this, but we know from research that actually, they carried Smith watches. I think the exposition was what 1953, and so when they heard news of that, Rolex came out with an advertising that said, Rolex has conquered the summit of Everest, and then later on they found out actually no, the explorers did not carry it to the final mile to the summit. It was actually another brand of watch. So I saw a letter from a Rolex director congratulating Smith's company, but on the other hand, they continued to put out advertising that said, this, Rolex conquered Everest, and then they built this kind of mythology through their advertising. And the irony of this thing is that, the Rolex Explorer is associated with that, but the actual watch that was supplied to the expedition was an Oyster Perpetual. So even if they had carried a Rolex to the summit, it wouldn't be this model of Explorer, right? And yet somehow they have created this impression, and over the decades, people now associate this watch with that historic achievement. And so I know this is a little cynical, but I think a lot of the iconic status really comes from marketing that has been repeated over and over again, passed on through generations. And I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that, because the truth is Rolex did contribute to that expedition. They did, contribute funds and watches. So I don't know. I mean, is that a good thing or a bad thing? But it's basically, from an economist perspective, it's marketing that has been mythologized.
I'll say this, Carl.
Something that's becoming iconic. Sometimes, to be iconic sometimes means to be original. So if you break through at that time and you break through, if you make a new timepiece, it might not be iconic now, but people copy you later, and then their timepiece might become iconic, but it's based on a breakthrough. Back then, the breakthroughs were, how can we make a waterproof timepiece that will go to the top of Mount Everest? So it was a very big thing back then. Now, I could do that in my workshop and waterproof it on these computerized machines that I have here. Back then, it was like it was a great mythology. Like, that's where the oyster case comes from, and the whole oyster name was proving that something can be done when everyone says it can't be done. That it can go this deep and that deep, and then that became iconic because just like my music, they broke through. They did something, and then that passed on generationally.
I want to make a statement about the marketing, and really my my conclusion is we want to be romanced as consumers. To have a flirtation through advertising which romanticizes a concept is oftentimes more attractive to us than maybe the truthfulness of that statement. And of course, there are plenty of people who are truth seekers and do not want to be, told lies. But at the end of the day, it begins with the desire where we are attracted to these sexy stories. And so that for me is a more compelling instinct than the seeking for truth. We look for things that feel good, and then we ask later, is this a sustainable feeling? But the first question is, do we like this story? The second question is, do we believe the story?
Let's move to segment 3. Building a watch collection is an art, blending aesthetics, history, and ethics. Strategies include selecting renowned brands, seeking rarity, and maintaining condition. Challenges arise in verifying authenticity and navigating market fluctuations. Ethical considerations are paramount. Sourcing must be legal and responsible, with an eye on environmental impact and cultural sensitivity. Investment matters, but it's not the sole focus. In building a collection, it's about more than timepieces. It's about values, tastes, and aspirations. It's about appreciating craftsmanship and innovation, where each watch is a symbol of a unique journey. I think this is a natural progression of where the discussion was going. I mean, no doubt that marketing and stories, it goes back to, it seems like every watch collector, when you review the watches in your collection, there are stories. It's connected to your grandfather or your father or your parents. and there's meaning there to you. Or maybe I just want to own the watch that Roger Federer is wearing at the US Open. James Bond, of course, multiple companies have benefited with the association with James Bond. I love James Bond. I'm likely to want to own a James Bond watch. Carl, can you take us through, because you have like this inspiration from your father. So you were exposed to watches when you were younger, and now you're building your collection today. Like, what kind of advice do you offer to a new watch collector, or even somebody who has a collection? Because as an economist, you pay attention to market fluctuations in pricing.
Yeah, so I think, the matter of money and budgets is always a factor, but I will say what every watch collector really does say and should say, is that you should buy what you like. I am just as much in love with some of my G-Shocks as I am with some of my more expensive pieces, like the Omega CK859, which I recently purchased. By the way, Ariel, you know what? I was talking to the sales rep at the store, and he told me that your blog is the one to read. Because no, true story. Because I feel like a lot of the other websites, they've become more like front ends for watch dealers. But anyway, so in terms of the advice I would give, obviously, I mean, money does matter, but we don't really we shouldn't really talk about investing in watches expecting that the price is going to go up. That was a very rare occurrence in the last couple of years with Rolex. No, we should not be talking about that. And that is something that's really unraveling. I did a market analysis of why that happened and why it's going away. And I think people have realized, it was just the perfect storm of circumstances with the lockdown and with supply chain management. I think, Andy, you're a finance professional. You understand the difference between a spike in demand versus capital investment. Ramping up production, it's a huge challenge for Rolex, especially if we're talking about watchmaking. But my personal journey in this has been that I think everybody finds their own answers. I started with cheap. My strategy was I start with cheap watches because there's nothing wrong with them. But I also understood I didn't know what I wanted until I experienced it. And, Dan has talked about the disease, spreading the disease. I had it bad. I mean, I had it really bad. I mean, I was on Amazon every night. I would order a watch, and before it was delivered, I'd be looking for the next watch, So, I mean, fortunately, it was that we're talking about $30 Casios and $100, G-Shocks, but I knew at a certain point I had to learn about watches and what I wanted out of them by simply wearing it on my wrist. And it's taken me months and months to understand, what is it that's really important to me? How do I incorporate watches into my daily life? I buy watches to wear. There's no safety queens in my collection, So I would say, what? Be mindful of your budget. That's perfectly okay. It's perfectly fine to start with Quartz watches and understand, what you like, but enjoy the journey. Enjoy the experience of wearing watches and getting to know yourself and knowing the kind of watches you like. And I don't want to sound too grandiose, but it really is a mutual kind of relationship that you develop with your pieces.
I got to chime in here because I've been giving advice like this for many, many years, and I've been able to sort of boil it down to a couple of key things. One of the things that I advise, and this is hard for some people, is to become a watch collector in a vacuum to start. And what I mean by that is ignore what other people are thinking. Carl made a very important statement, buy what you like. But how do you know what you like? How do you first determine what you like outside of being influenced by others? And the way to do that is have a solo journey. Look at watches without any concern for what other people are going to think about it. Don't care if it's popular. This is how you see what you naturally gravitate to. We all know where our buying comfort level is. If you don't feel confident in spending $5,000 on a watch, Do not do that until you feel confident, because you know that you're going to like that, and buy a lot of inexpensive watches to test out sizes and materials and shapes and movements and colors and things like that. That's the way to learn what you like. Only after you have some confidence in your own taste and some maturity as a collector, that is when I say, now it's time to become part of the community. I've seen a lot of difficulty and people trying to become a part of the community before they're actually a watch lover, thinking that becoming part of the community will do so. That doesn't actually work. And then the last thing I'll say on it is, like, the worst thing you can do is like buy like a 16-year-old a brand new Rolex, because where does he or she go from there, right? If you go straight to the things which are good, if you buy yourself like a Rolex Submariner as your first watch, you won't appreciate it. You won't know what's good about it. You won't know why it stands out from the others. So don't go to Rolex or the popular brands first. Buy weird stuff, experiment a little bit, give yourself something to reach for. Don't get yourself the Rolex first.
Yeah, start
Dan.
with an Invicta.
I'm here to give a little different story, as I'm here to represent independent watchmaking. And in independent watchmaking, we are all independent, which means we get to create whatever I would like to create. And it's usually creating it for myself, because I think it's the most badass timepiece ever created in the history of the world. And it's all about our stories, our struggles as watchmakers, being independent, separate from corporate boardrooms who would have to tell me that even the mechanics have to be made a certain way, because, Dan, you're making the wheels too thick and you're wasting beryllium bronze. Whereas I take a different approach, where I overbuild everything to last for centuries. That's my story. I'm an ex-heavy metal guy who created one of the world's largest bands. This is my story and my journey. So people who are interested in what I'm producing, they want a piece of me. They want a piece of my struggle. They watch me restore machines with bloody hands for years, trying to find a machine, trudging through Switzerland to buy 3 of them somewhere over a 5-10 year period to make one, because my brocading machine that makes my dials, there's only one other in existence in the history of the world, and that's at Breguet. So I have that here. That's my story, and people love to see inside my walls. So yes, in all of watchmaking, everyone is buying the story. I'm not a brand. I've been through all that in my past history of so many years sitting at the bench. I'm in the independent world, telling you that investing in the independent timepieces in the last 8 years, if not longer, up until now, is the complete opposite of what's been told here. It is the best investment and you can put your money in. All of my friends are either their books are closed or you're looking at a 7 to 10 year waiting list. So that should actually really tell you something of what's going on in independent watchmaking. And again, we are the ghost builders of the bigger brands. When they want to do a special piece, they're still calling upon us. Some of my friends are specialists in making certain kinds of pinions. Some of my friends are specialists in metallurgy of making nameplates a certain way. And they have those specialized machines where we can do 1, 2, 3, or up to 10 pieces that's functionally beyond precision, where we're talking accuracies of plus or minus 2 microns that these pieces have to be made for, these larger companies. We are those people, and we are the precision masters. That's just the way we live. That's our story. Another independent has his story. He lives somewhere else in the world, in Japan. There's an incredible independent watchmaker there, and their watches represent all their upbringing of being Japanese. It's inherently in his timepiece, and no one in a boardroom is telling him how to make that timepiece. It just so happens, just like my past music, he puts his Japanese independent timepiece out there, and it just so happens there's many people who also love his story and that timepiece. So that's their investment, and it's climbing. So there's different worlds to watchmaking. Again, that we're all said this before. There's something in it for everybody. I'm just here to represent independence and to give some insight to collectors who only know the bigger brands. To know someone like, look up Paul Gerber. You know, he's the gentleman who made the most complicated wristwatch in the world. He's also the gentleman that most of any flyback watch that you have on your wrist is Paul Gerber inside. I don't care what brand name is on the front. He's the master of flybacks. He's invented it all. There's people like Paul Gerber around the, you know, France, Switzerland, and all over the place.
Yeah,
And
drop
now
some more names of independents who you think are just
right now, I think Luc Monet in France. He doesn't even make his own timepieces, but I won't say who he makes for because obviously there's NDAs involved. But he makes parts for what a lot of you people who are in the upper echelon of spending in the name brands are wearing on your wrist. He's making those wheels. They can't make them that accurate at the factory. He's the guy. Okay, but there's other people like him. And remember, we're talking people who are spending a lot of money on unique pieces here. This is beyond the. This is in cars, like Ariel said. I always like to relate it to cars too. There's a Mustang. There's you know, Rolex is a Mustang V8. You know, and then there's Ferraris, and then there's supercars. You know, and I view we're supercar mechanics once you get up into the Paul Gerbers and those kind of course, Roger Smith, which his watch just what was it Ariel, like $4 million it just went for? I mean, you can't say that watch is not going down. That gentleman at Philips bought one of his first pocket watches he made for like $4 million. He's going to be worth $8 million in a few years. So where's the bad investment there?
I have to comment on the current popularity of independents because it's a very fascinating phenomenon, especially from an economics perspective. And it really has to do with the mainstream luxury brands being so popular and unavailable that a focus on the independents was attractive for two reasons. One, because at least for a while you could buy them and the prices were comparatively good for, you know, what you're getting compared to some of the corporate luxury brands, but also the popularity of the value proposition of luxury watches as being worth it suddenly opened up the eyes to many, many more casual buyers that high-end watches are a thing, and because of that, they feel comfortable buying from what is essentially an artist, a living artist, and you know, performing their craft, and you're buying their time. You're really buying hours of their life, and their dedication is a beautiful thing. But if it wasn't for this huge Rolex bubble and all the bubbling that accompanied that, I don't think there would be as much visibility on the independents. And my hope is that as this sort of bubble decreases, there will remain an awareness and an interest in the independents to keep them alive, because they know that without the big brands creating awareness out there, there isn't going to be a market for them. They sort of exist to a degree on the coattails, but that's where all the passion, that's where all the innovation is. You know, all the things that Dan is saying, that's absolutely correct. But we have to remember that there cannot be a market for the independents, in my opinion, without the popularity and the legitimacy that the mainstream brands bring.
Ariel, thank you for that.
We all work hand in hand. Correct.
Thank you for that context. Let's move on to segment 4. The secondary market for luxury watches is a treasure trove for collectors, but requires savvy navigation. For buyers, research is key. Understand the watch's history. Verify authenticity through reputable dealers. Inspect its condition. And don't shy away from negotiation. Sellers, know your watch's value through professional appraisals. Choose the right platform, be it an auction house or online marketplace, and provide transparency with detailed descriptions and images. But beware of pitfalls. Counterfeit products lurk, and market fluctuations can affect prices. Legal considerations, especially in international dealings, must not be overlooked. Whether buying or selling, the secondary market offers a rich world of horology. With caution and strategy, it's a journey filled with discovery and opportunity. Ariel, the recent news has been pretty crazy, I think, in the watch area. I mean, I watched a video of possibly fraudulent watches from a collector. I saw that there was like a Ponzi scheme among salespeople, and like
fraud where there's money. What a surprise!
Yeah. So how does one protect themselves? Like, what do you do?
I would say that most of the time, if you are going to be victimized in the watch space, you know it. That watch price was too good to be true. That didn't seem like the best place to buy a timepiece. I'm not sure if you can trust that individual. If you know what you're doing, it's pretty easy to stay out of trouble. There is a large number of very reputable places to buy watches. If people try to take shortcuts, maybe get greedy, thinking they're finding some type of treasure, I'm not sure if an online posting is going to be where you get that anymore. If you want the best deals out there, it's going to be in person. You're going to meet with someone, you're going to develop a relationship with them, and you're going to be able to get the best deals. Online, what you should be looking for are signs of assuredness. It's an authorized dealer. It's from the brand. The vast majority of the time, you're not going to be sort of screwed over that way. It's when you start to be a bit more risky that those risks can come up. So I'd like to hear what other people say, but I think it's actually quite easy to avoid those issues if you if you just go to reputable places.
For many years, I was an authorized Rolex after sales service, countless years really, and a specialist in the early vintage Rolex timepieces. And I can tell you what people don't see, because most people are going to be examining only the outside of the timepiece, especially a Rolex where you cannot see through the back to the movement. That, yeah, you can see if your little bezel cover is an aftermarket or if your crown is an aftermarket. But when I pop the inside of Rolexes and other brands, I'm just not singling out Rolex for any apparent reason, except for it's the most bootleg watch in the history of where we walk. The parts, when someone can't have a Rolex parts account as a watchmaker, and that is very hard to secure nowadays, but you need specialized equipment from Rolex. You need to have graduated from appropriate schools, such as WOSTEP, like I did in Switzerland. And then you have to go on for years of training and apprenticeships. And then you have to have clean rooms separate from your dirty rooms, like I have here. The certain waterproofing machines that are $10,000 each are still not good enough. So where's a watchmaker going to go when he needs to make money? He's going to go and find bootleg parts. And the bootleg parts are so damn good. When I open up that watch, that sometimes I can't even tell until I actually take the whole movement apart, get the movement, and then pick it up. And I only know because I've held the real part so many times in my hand. So inside the watch, it's very hard for someone that's not a watchmaker to know what's really inside. And if you're buying it from what's supposed to be a reputable dealer, and still going to give you a warranty, because those parts work. They work just fine. They might not last as long. And some of the parts, I know many years ago, they busted the guys making the parts in Italy. They're ex-Rolex guys that used to make the real parts in Switzerland. So they're damn good. Not bracelet parts, not crystals. I'm talking about wheels, gears, pinions, jewels, barrels, everything inside the watch. Every single part of every single movement is bootlegged. And it's bootleg damn good. There's crappy versions too, but there's very good ones. That's what you really have to watch out for, because if you purchase that watch and something goes wrong and you send it in to an authorized Rolex or to Rolex themselves, they will not repair your watch unless every single one of those parts is removed and replaced with official, real Rolex parts. And it's going to be a very large bill.
And they'll charge you a lot for that.
They charge you a lot. It's the only way for them to make sure that when you get that watch back, you don't get the usual comment from someone who wears a Rolex. Rolex is always running 35 seconds slow or 35 seconds fastest. Piece of shit. There's better watches out there. It ain't the watch, buddy. It's the parts in the watchmaker. Okay, they're kick-ass watches, and as well as Omegas. Listen, there's bootleg parts for all the big brands and the most sold watches, because that's where the money is, at the watchmaking bench. Okay, in repairs. So be wary, be careful, and make sure it's a reputable place, like Ariel said, that you can get it taken care of correctly.
Yeah, I faced this problem recently because, like I said, I bought my OP at the dealer, but my Explorer I bought online, and I did have to do research because I was scared about replicas. Because I found out they're so good. They are really, really good. In fact, at this point, I think the counterfeiters are now replicating the Rolex movements inside, and I think a watchmaker could still be able to tell the difference. But it's getting harder and harder.
Mhm.
You know, I talked to my local watchmaker here, and he told me that people bring fake Rolexes to him. You know, and I said, aren't they embarrassed? He said, no, they just give it to me. I fix it. And you know what he said? He said, other than the movement, uh, those watches are actually really high quality, you know. And so that raises all kinds of questions. I mean, some people joke about the counterfeiters can make a great watch, almost as good as a Rolex for $1,000. What is Rolex doing, charging us $20K for a watch? You know, as an economist, I like to take a kind of a longer historical perspective about this because, when you look into the history of Swiss watchmaking, you realize that they actually got their start making counterfeit watches. Especially in the late 1600s, early 1700s, they made counterfeit English pocket watches, which they distributed through anonymous dealers. There was some research done by Dr. Struthers on the history that's really fascinating. And they also started selling to the US market because American railroad watches were in high demand. And it got so bad that Congress had to pass a law saying, you have to stamp the watch with the country of origin. And the Swiss watchmakers had to actually have kind of hide Swiss made in their watches in an attempt to fool people to thinking that those are American made. So this whole counterfeiting thing has had a long history. It's been going back, I guess, at least 300 years, and it's a real problem, but it's also a kind of an economic cyclical thing, as new watchmakers get started in a particular country, their industry gets started. A lot of them really basically they are producing fakes or homage. An homage watch, is a big issue in watch collecting because there's lots of ethical considerations. How much originality do you need to say, that's a new design? And I see the same thing happening with the Chinese right now. They started with counterfeit. Now they're moving into homage watches, and now they're trying to go up market with, quote, more original design. So it's kind of fascinating as an economist to see this cycle go through on the Swiss industry and then being repeated by the Chinese. We may have a time where, 50 years from now, the Chinese are going to be complaining about counterfeits to their watches, So, I mean, I'm fascinated to watch, to see all this develop.
I want to comment here because I've also thought about this. I mean, plenty of times I've seen an amazing fake and thought to myself, if only this group just had their own brand, this would be great. They're making a super good watch for like $300. This is amazing. But you have to ask yourself, the economy within which this comes about is in response to market demand. They see this market wants this thing, which is very expensive. If we make a lower price version of that, we'll get sales. And that's essentially the strategy. It's not too much more complicated than that. They don't bring the type of creativity necessary for the branding. The actual creation of the brand itself and all that goes within that is sort of out of the bounds of what they want to do. And I think that this large industrial base designed to create fakes would not exist if it were for the demand for the originals. So it's sort of a parasitic element on top of this other thing. You take the Rolexes away, they wouldn't know what to do with themselves. The companies that are making the fakes, they wouldn't just make their own brand. They'd be like, what else in the market is popular that we can make a lower price version of? And as others have said, this has been an issue ever since the beginning of the formal watch industry. You look at Breguet watches, for example, and they had all these sophisticated techniques to make sure that the different parts matched up, that you weren't taking a movement and you putting it in a different case. They wanted to make sure, and they had a secret way of doing all that. So it's always been a cat and mouse game for a long time. But the irony is that these copycats only put so much effort in as to make something that looks like something else at a lower price. The ability to add the creativity and the artistic element doesn't exist. Maybe in the future that will all change. Maybe the regions of the world where those fakes are made will be culturally different, and creativity and artistry are going to be a bigger part of what goes on there. That's all entirely possible. But right now, I don't think you can separate those parts and say, the fake guys, they're going to be awesome. We're going to figure out something else to do with them. If it wasn't for the Rolex demand out there, they would decide something else to do.
Yeah, and also the counterfeiters are not paying R&D costs. That's part of the reasons why their prices can be lower. So they are free riders, and free riding obviously is a huge economic problem. So let's see how things shake out.
Well, there's how I started. There's two parts to the story. One is it's no longer a $50 cheap Rolex. That's not what I was speaking about. I was speaking about people who are purchasing genuine pre-owned Rolexes and brands such as, who are spending a good amount of money and expecting what's inside is true. And these aren't the same people who are making these cheap watches. These are people who are making quality products for watchmakers, because most watchmakers, we can't just call up Rolex and say, I graduated from this watchmaking school, I would like to open a Rolex store in my neighborhood. It doesn't happen. There's many roadblocks, and you need, $500,000 won't even get you close to machines and buildings and safe and clean rooms and various inspections where they just happen to pop in at any given time and shut you down if you manage to get parts. So perhaps their grandfather or their father was a watchmaker, and that's how he made most of his money, because let's face it, Rolex is the most sold timepiece, so it's the most repaired watch. It's a timepiece. So if he can't get parts, he's got two things to do: find a new career or find bootleg parts. So be careful and be wary, because those bootleg parts are they're as almost as good, if not as good, as the originals. Because again, after 20 years is all that the Rolex has to give you parts for. I don't know if anyone knew that. The Swiss law is 20 years. So if you buy a used watch that's older than 20 years, they don't have to supply you with a part. They can tell you, go take a walk. So the patent's gone. So it is legal to make those parts. But what you have inside when you're purchasing the watch cannot go back to Rolex to be repaired. To be wary. So at least if you're spending $4,000 on a used Rolex and it's going to cost you $3,200 at Rolex to get it repaired, that's what I'm talking. Be careful.
Yeah, and I think it's also a supply chain problem, because we know that other than the Holy Trinity and Rolex, the mid-tier Swiss brands are sourcing their components from China or Southeast Asia, and that's part of the reasons why they're getting so good at creating counterfeit parts and watches, is because the whole concept of Swiss made has changed a lot. Before, in the traditional, they had this system where they sourced all their parts and labor from local suppliers, right, in Switzerland. But now with modern supply chains, I think it's becoming very difficult to protect your intellectual property.
Because and here we go back to where independence in the times you're speaking about, those were the independent watchmakers in Switzerland, with the specialities of one guy just specialized in making pinions, and he was damn good at it. But now we have CNC, we have Swiss mills, we have lasers, we have EDM, which is wire cutting spark erosion machines. It's cut with a very thin wire that's thinner than one hair on your head, and that's doing the cutting. Okay, so someone who has those machines now can reverse engineer parts that are being made in Switzerland, because the wheels and pinions are not being made like they used to be on gear cutting machines, Shaolin lathes like I have here. They're not. They're being made a lot skinnier, and they're being made in mass production on those type of machines, as I just let you guys know about.
Thank you. We're going to hit segment 5 and bring it home. Wear them wisely, considering their age and design. Regular service every 3 to 5 years by reputable specialists is a must. Be cautious with polishing. It can alter the original finish and reduce value. Preserve original dials, bezels, crystals, and bracelets, as they add to both aesthetic and monetary worth. Consider the legacy. Proper maintenance ensures that these timepieces can be passed down without losing their value or appeal. Ethical considerations such as sourcing and authenticity are vital in building a collection for future generations. In a world where time is fleeting, these watches stand as symbols of history, craftsmanship, and family heritage. Treat them with the respect they deserve, and they'll tick on, timeless and treasured. Ariel, with instruments, I'm a believer that instruments should be played and not just like put into a case for like museum. if one wants to wear a watch and enjoy the watch, what kind of maintenance is necessary so that you can pass it on?
That's a good question. Of course, Dan, as the watchmaker, will of course elaborate. Um, I am as well of the belief that you shouldn't have watches you don't wear. I mean, at some point your collection gets so big, maybe you can't, but you should get every watch with the intention of wearing it. And I think that means that some of the more complicated watches out there, they will break more often. So if you have the stomach to do servicing more often, get the perpetual calendars and minute repeaters. If the idea of getting a watch repaired a lot bothers you, stick with three-hand automatics or manually wound. Even sometimes simple chronographs can, if you don't use them too much, can last a while. But the reality is that enjoying them means using them. Using them means wear and tear. And you have to just sort of be mindful. Don't get the most exotic movements out there because getting them fixed can be quite a headache. Certain brands make that a better experience than others. But I think that people should have different watches for different occasions. You should have what we call the beater watch. And the beater watch it can be a number of watches, but it's the one that you don't worry about. You wear it around town when you're doing chores, maybe in situations where it gets dirty or nicked up. You're not going to wear a $10,000 watch as that unless you have a lot of disposable income because you're worried about it. You're going to wear something which is a few hundred, a few thousand. And then you have your special occasion watches, which you baby a little bit more. And we all have clothing like that. So I think that everyone should have a couple of special occasion watches that to take care of. But for the most part, if you can't wear the watch, then it just becomes, what they say, the safe queen. And no one who's a real watch collector respects this, right? Nobody likes the idea of a watch sitting in the packaging. We respect that in the future someone was going to want it, but this isn't a watch enthusiast buying this. This is a financial speculator hoping that someone in the future will want it. And these are two very different types of mentalities towards acquiring this product.
Dan, what about your thoughts since you've done aftermarket service and you build watches?
So in our grandfathers or great-grandfathers' times, the timepieces were oiled with animal fat-based products, meaning the products were not synthetic. So if you let the watch sit for 5-10 years and it came to my bench and I open it up, it's congealed like your grandmother used Crisco fat and left it in the pan overnight. That's what it looks like.
Horrible.
But there's still something. There's still something in the jewels. If you don't understand how it works, in a watch there's a pinion and then there's a wheel. And because we can't make bearings that small, we use rubies that have a hole drilled in them. And then there's a sink cut out of the ruby. And in that sink, we drop with a needle certain viscosity oils and greases. Not too much, not too little. Every watch has its certain type of oil. So nowadays, all oils and greases, listen up, are synthetic. They all dissipate, which means you could put it in your safe on your auto winder, or you could put it in your dresser drawer and let it sit. Every 5 to 7 years, there's nothing left in every single one of those jewel sinks. So now that pinion, as soon as you wind the watch, is running dry in a hole through a stone. That's what a ruby is. It's a synthetic stone. It's almost as hard as diamond. It's not a real ruby anymore. The old pocket watches, they are real rubies. So now you're going to start your watch and it's going to turn and score that pinion because it's a rock touching stainless steel on the pinion. Now you need to replace that pinion because it has a mark on it, which will slow down the wheel and its ability to be pushed by the barrel and the mainspring. So no matter what watch you buy, if it's mechanical, you need to have it serviced completely stripped down, which means if you buy a normal time-only watch, like Ariel said, keep it simple, stupid, your service every 5 to 7 years is very inexpensive. If you move up the ladder to chronographs, perpetual calendars, a perpetual calendar is virtually like you buying a Ferrari. You have to have someone such as myself with the knowledge who's been trained to take apart that timepiece. It has many, many more complications and parts that need to be oiled and greased with certain viscosity and specialty oils and greases. And you have to be trained. Usually in Switzerland, it's a minimum of a year on one movement. I think one person in one complication room only works on that perpetual calendar for a minimum of a year and is trained only on that, so he can get the speed and know-how and idiosyncrasies that go along with it. It can't just be tossed around. So that's it. You have to take care of your timepiece and do preventive maintenance, just like you change the oil in your car. What happens if you don't change the oil in your car? The piston rings score the inside of the piston in your engine. It is the exact same thing. Now, all the jewels need to be replaced, and all your pinions need to be replaced. And that's when your service bill comes back, and you go, why is this service bill $3,600?
Yeah, I do not buy mechanical chronographs. I looked up the servicing cost for a Valgio 7750, and it was minimum. I'm going to say $1,000, $1,500, probably more, and that's for a standard ETA movement. So I avoid. I stick to simple three-handers because I'm not a rich guy. And I actually, when it comes to chronographs, I actually prefer my digital for precision. But I want to reference what Dan was saying before about the availability of parts, because I think that's something that new collectors don't really or may not be familiar with, which is that, all these manufacturers have been consolidated under, Swatch, Richemont, and they're trying to become like Apple in the sense that they're trying to build their own ecology. If you want to have your watch service, you can't go to, or it's very difficult to find a independent watchmaker who can access all the parts that you need, and they're forcing people to send their watches and be serviced, and it's all under the control of Rolex or whoever else, and then you might not see your watch for 6 months or whatever it is. So I'm very disturbed by this trend where I think the manufacturers should be more open to letting people take care of their watches and fall in love with their watches, but it seems like they're trying to squeeze every dime out of them in a time when wearing watches is becoming more and more scarce. So I think this is backwards, and I really wish that they would change their policies.
Well, this has been going on a very long time, and it is the main driving reason why there is independent watchmaking now, because they cut off all of us, all the companies, because during the crisis when luxury watches weren't doing so well, they had to figure out a way to make more income. So if they close down the ability to sell parts to certified watchmakers who graduated from such a school like myself, and just shut them all down and force the consumer to send them only to me and monopolize the industry, then I can charge you whatever the hell I want to charge you. You know why? Because you can't take your watch to be repaired anywhere else on planet Earth, because there is no repair parts. Just like buying a Mercedes and your radiator blows after warranty, and you go to your neighborhood Mercedes specialist and he says to you, they won't sell me the radiator and there's no aftermarket radiators.
It's scandalous, I think. I've heard a lot of terrible stories from independent watchmakers all around the world whose businesses were so negatively affected because of Rolex making this decision. Let's remember, Rolex still makes money selling these parts, but they make more money servicing the watches themselves. And they want all the business to go to their authorized dealers as well as themselves for servicing. And because, as Dan said, this is a major part of their revenue stream. And I think it really just comes down to money. This was a financial decision they made. They say things like, well, it ensures quality and da-da-da-da-da-da. But people like Dan will tell you that watchmakers like him probably put more time and love into these repairs and things like that than someone who's just doing like an assembly line and who will never be complained to. Remember, if you go to Rolex and your watch doesn't come back working properly, you don't know who to complain to. But if an independent person does it, you can be like, Dan, what happened? And he or she will probably fix it for you. So I think that it's really tragic that the relationship between independent watchmaker and consumer of mainstream watches has really gone away in a large part. And I really lament that. And I hope that things will change in the future.
Thank you for the thoughtful comments from all of our panelists today. You guys have given everyone a lot to think about. I think my takeaways are that watches are a luxury in this time where we all have a smartphone with a clock, and watches are a way to celebrate ourselves. It's a very personal path that one can take in choosing what you're wearing on your wrist, and the stories are very important. whether you're commemorating an event or you're remembering family memories that are important to you. There are just many, many important stories to think about in watch collecting. And then I loved what Ariel said about try to watch collect in a vacuum and not think about what others are saying, but really try to spend the time to think about, what brings you joy, and then maybe the disease will likely continue. So visit all of our panelists. You can visit Dan at danspitz.com. He's got a really exciting watch series that he's working on for heavy metal, and I'm excited to see what that's going to look like and what heavy metal. Visit Ariel at the place, aBlogtoWatch.com, and thank you to Carl, who remains hidden, but you can see him and see what he looks like at youtube.com at mywatchjourney6579. Once again, thank you for our panelists. Thank you to everybody who is watching and listening out there. Mark your calendars for next week, October 4th. We've got Investing for Impact, the rise of socially responsible investing. But for now, do something that scares you, because that's where the magic happens. And I don't know, I have to go watch shopping now.
Thank you, Andy.